The premiere night of The Mummy was supposed to be a celebration, but something followed us home.
911, what's your emergency?
I worked on Mummy as part of the technical crew, handling equipment setup and coordinating with the sound department during the entire production. I was close with Cruz, one of the lead actors, closer than most people on set. We had developed a genuine friendship over the months of filming, the kind of bond that forms when you're spending 14-hour days together in challenging conditions, dealing with the stress and exhaustion that comes with making a film of that scale. By the time the premiere night arrived, everyone was exhausted but excited. We'd poured everything into this project, and now we were finally going to see it on the big screen with an audience. The theater was packed with industry people, press, fans who'd been following the production. Cameras were flashing constantly outside. Laughter echoed everywhere as people greeted each other and posed for photos. The energy should have been purely celebratory, purely positive, but backstage, away from the public areas and the red carpet chaos, the atmosphere felt distinctly off. A few crew members mentioned experiencing cold spots near the main entrance to the theater, not the normal chill of air conditioning or evening air seeping in from outside, but concentrated pockets of cold that didn't make sense given the crowded, warm environment. One security guard, a professional who'd worked dozens of premieres without incident, refused to stand by the side hall after the first hour. He claimed he heard someone chanting softly behind the curtains in a language he didn't recognize. When other staff checked, they found nothing, but the guard wouldn't return to that post. He insisted on being reassigned to a different area of the theater. We brushed it off at the time. Big nights come with nerves and heightened emotions. People get anxious. They imagine things. They misinterpret ordinary sounds and sensations. It seemed easier to dismiss these reports than to acknowledge that something might actually be wrong. During the screening itself, while hundreds of people sat watching the film we'd worked so hard to create, something genuinely strange happened. The sound briefly cut out. Not the film's audio, which continued playing normally on screen, but the sound in the room itself. The crowd went completely silent in an instant. Not a natural silence where conversation gradually fades, but an abrupt, total absence of noise. It felt like the air had been pulled out of the space, like we were suddenly existing in a vacuum where sound couldn't travel properly. Then, just as suddenly, it came back. The normal ambient noise of breathing and shifting bodies and whispered comments returned. People laughed it off nervously, making jokes about technical difficulties. But I was watching Cruz during that moment, and I saw him turn sharply in his seat, looking behind him and then around the theater with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. He looked genuinely unsettled, genuinely afraid in a way that seemed completely disproportionate to a simple audio glitch. After the premiere concluded and the formal events ended, we gathered at a private after-party that had been organized for cast and crew. It was supposed to be a chance to decompress and celebrate together away from the public eye, but Cruz's behavior was noticeably off throughout the evening. He barely touched his drink, which was unusual for him. He's normally social and engaged at these kinds of events, but that night he seemed distracted and distant. At one point, he pulled me aside and told me he felt watched, not in the normal sense of being at a party where people are looking at you and talking to you. He described it as the specific feeling you get when someone stands too close behind you, when you can sense their presence even though you can't see them. He kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the room like he expected to find someone staring at him, but he could never identify the source of the feeling. Later that night, after most people had left and the party was winding down, I drove Cruz home. He'd had a couple of drinks and didn't want to drive himself, and I was happy to help given how close we'd become. The moment we walked into his house, both of us noticed the temperature drop. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical, not the kind of sudden freezing you see in horror movies, just enough to make you aware that something was different, that the interior of the house felt colder than it should given the mild evening temperature outside. His motion-activated security lights started flickering even though there was clearly no movement outside that should have triggered them. The sensors are designed to detect substantial motion, not leaves or small animals, yet they kept activating and deactivating randomly. We joked about it nervously, making comments about faulty wiring and needing to call an electrician, but neither of us was really laughing. There was an edge of genuine unease in our voices that neither of us could quite hide. I ended up crashing on his couch that night rather than driving home late. Around 2 in the morning, I woke suddenly from a light sleep. There were footsteps coming from upstairs. Slow, measured footsteps, heavy enough to be clearly audible, clearly deliberate. Not the random creaks and settling sounds that old houses make. These were the distinct sounds of someone walking. I sat up and saw that Cruz was already awake too, sitting up in his bed, visible through his open bedroom door, staring at the ceiling. We both heard it. We made eye contact across the space, and I could see the fear in his expression mirroring what I was feeling. When he finally gathered the courage to check the upstairs hallway, moving slowly and quietly like he was afraid of what he might find, there was no one there. Every room was empty, but his bedroom door, which he specifically remembered closing before going to sleep, was now standing wide open. Neither of us had gotten up during the night. There was no explanation for how it could have opened on its own. Over the next few days, things escalated in frequency and intensity. Objects in his house started shifting places, small things at first, keys that moved from the counter to the table, a phone that migrated from one room to another, then larger items, furniture that seemed to be positioned differently than he remembered. Mirrors throughout the house would fog up spontaneously, developing condensation on their surfaces without any steam or moisture source that could explain it. Cruz told me he kept having the same dream night after night, the same figure appearing in his sleep, something wrapped in fabric, bandages or burial cloth, completely silent, always standing in the corners of rooms in his dream, just standing there, watching him, never moving closer, but never leaving either, just maintaining its presence, making its existence known. One night, while I was visiting to check on him, because I was genuinely worried about his mental state, the lights in the house went out completely. Total darkness. This wasn't a normal power outage where you can see neighboring houses also losing power. This was isolated to his house, to his property alone. In that darkness, while we both stood frozen and disoriented, something whispered his name, not loudly or theatrically, close, intimate, like whatever was speaking was standing right next to him, speaking directly into his ear. The voice was dry and papery, ancient-sounding, forming his name with difficulty, like it was learning how to speak. The power came back seconds later, the lights flooding back on as suddenly as they'd gone dark. But the house felt fundamentally different afterward. The air felt heavy, pressured, like we were suddenly existing at a higher altitude where breathing required more effort. The atmosphere had changed in a way that made both of us want to leave immediately. Cruz stopped staying in that house very soon after that incident. He packed a bag and moved into a hotel temporarily, claiming he needed a change of scenery, that he was feeling claustrophobic after months of intense filming. But I knew the real reason. We both did. Then, quietly and without much explanation to friends or colleagues, he sold the house, put it on the market, and accepted the first reasonable offer he received, even though real estate agents told him he could get more money if he waited. He didn't want to wait. He wanted to be rid of it completely. He moved to a different part of the city entirely, cutting all ties with that location. We never talked publicly about what happened during those weeks after the premiere. The press never got wind of it. Fans never knew. It remained private, buried, something we both agreed to leave unexamined and undiscussed. But I know this with absolute certainty, and Cruz knows it too, even if we never speak about it. Whatever we stirred up during the production of Mummy, whatever energy or presence or force we accidentally invoked while making that film about ancient curses and disturbed burial grounds, it didn't stay contained to the screen. It didn't remain safely in the realm of fiction and special effects and carefully controlled film production. And it didn't stop at the premiere, didn't dissipate once the public screening was over and the audience went home. It followed us. It attached itself to Cruz specifically. It knew where he lived. It found him in his private space, in his sanctuary, in the place where he should have been safest. And that fact, more than anything else that happened, is what truly terrifies me, even now, years later, when I think back on those strange and horrible weeks.
If the curse was only meant for the film, then why did it know where Cruz lived?